Claire Donovan and Thomas Wainwright were two names that would forever be linked to the quiet town of Cedar Hollow, but for completely different reasons. One was a young, determined researcher chasing the secrets of the river. The other, a respected historian hiding a darkness beneath his calm exterior. When Claire vanished without a trace, the town's serene riverside life shattered, revealing a chilling truth. The river that had nurtured the community for generations had also been the silent witness to a series of terrifying crimes. In the small riverside town of Cedar Hollow, life moved at a quiet, predictable pace. Neighbors knew each other by name, local shops remained unchanged for decades, and the river that wound through the town had always been a source of both livelihood and leisure. Children played along its banks, fishermen cast their lines at dawn, and kayakers often traced the gentle currents on weekends. For most residents, the river was a comforting presence, a symbol of stability and continuity. That serenity, however, would soon be shattered by a disappearance that no one could have anticipated. Claire Donovan, a 27-year-old environmental researcher, had always been drawn to the river. Her work often involved studying its ecosystems and documenting the wildlife that thrived along its banks. She had a reputation for curiosity, persistence, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Her colleagues admired her dedication, but friends sometimes worried she pushed herself too far, exploring isolated stretches of the river alone. On a crisp October morning, with the air carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves and early frost, Claire set out on her kayak as she often did, notebook and camera secured in a waterproof bag. She told no one precisely where she intended to go, only that she would be back by evening. Hours passed, and when Claire failed to return, concern began to ripple through the town. Her apartment was orderly, as always, with signs of a routine interrupted, but no hint of a struggle. The local authorities were notified, and soon a search was underway. Canoes, kayaks, and small boats combed the river, while volunteers scoured the shoreline. The early investigation turned up little more than a few abandoned fishing rods and a stray jacket caught on a branch. It was as if Claire had simply vanished into thin air. The first clue appeared when a fisherman, navigating a narrow bend in the river, spotted a lone kayak drifting aimlessly near the water's edge. It was upright, intact, and unmanned, a silent testament to the presence that had been there. Nearby, her personal items, water bottle, a backpack, and a camera case, lay neatly on the muddy shore. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading into the surrounding woods, no overturned rocks or broken branches to suggest she had fallen or been chased. The scene was both orderly and unsettling, a stark contradiction that left investigators puzzled. Rumors began to circulate among the townspeople. Some whispered about the river's treacherous currents, known to shift unexpectedly and sweep away even experienced swimmers. Others speculated about the abandoned mill upriver, a crumbling structure with a dark reputation dating back decades, long rumored to conceal illicit activity and secret passageways. Stories that had once seemed like folklore resurfaced with renewed intensity as neighbors shared recollections of odd sightings and unexplained noises along the water late at night. Even those who had never believed in ghost stories began to feel an unease that the town had never experienced before. As darkness fell over Cedar Hollow, the river, which had always symbolized peace and continuity, now felt like an ominous presence. Its gentle current seemed to hide something beneath its surface, as though it were guarding a secret that no one had yet uncovered. The disappearance of Claire Donovan transformed the town, replacing its familiar calm with anxiety and suspicion. For the first time, residents were forced to confront the idea that even in a town as small and seemingly safe as Cedar Hollow, danger could emerge quietly without warning and vanish just as silently into the shadows of the river that everyone thought they knew. Days after Claire Donovan's disappearance, the atmosphere in Cedar Hollow had shifted from worry to a tense, restless unease. Search teams continued combing the river and its banks, but each day returned the same result: silence. The town, once familiar and predictable, now seemed shadowed by the unknown. Neighbors glanced at each other with suspicion, wary of the spaces they had always taken for granted. Even the river, which had flowed gently for generations, seemed altered, its usual sparkle replaced by a cold, reflective surface that hinted at hidden depths. It was during one of these long, fruitless searches that a local fisherman, known for his early morning trips along the river, stumbled upon something unusual. Partially buried in the mud, near a narrow bend where the current twisted unexpectedly, lay a small, rusted metal box. At first, he assumed it was mere debris, the forgotten remnants of an old boat or a discarded tool chest. But something about the box's placement, tucked away in an unlikely corner, caught his attention. With careful hands, he pried it open and peered inside. Inside the box were photographs, some faded with time, showing people whose faces were familiar to him, others unknown. There were maps of the town, each with certain houses circled in ink, and notes written in hurried, sometimes almost illegible handwriting. A series of journal entries described observations of people moving along the riverbanks, noting who arrived, who left, and when. One entry mentioned a watcher in the water, a figure who seemed to blend into the shadows and record the town's activities with meticulous attention. The fisherman, unsettled by what he found, immediately contacted the authorities. Detectives arrived quickly and took the box as evidence. The items inside suggested that someone had been observing Cedar Hollow for years, documenting the daily routines of its residents in almost obsessive detail. The implication was chilling. The disappearance of Claire Donovan might not have been a random accident. The journals hinted that the river, long seen as a source of life and recreation, had become a place of surveillance, a tool for someone who wanted to know everything about the town without being noticed. As investigators examined the photographs and maps, patterns began to emerge. The circles on the maps indicated locations near the river where people had disappeared, suggesting a deliberate method. The journals described behaviors in precise terms, from noting when residents left their homes to when they returned, and even recording the changing seasons. Each entry painted a picture of a calculated observer who had become intimately familiar with the town's rhythms. The discovery of the box transformed the case. What had initially seemed like an isolated disappearance now appeared to be part of a much larger and more sinister pattern. The river was no longer merely a setting. It was central to the mystery, a silent accomplice in the unseen activities of someone who had spent years hiding in plain sight. Residents of Cedar Hollow, who had once considered the river a safe, familiar space, now saw it through the lens of fear. Its gentle curves and reflective surface seemed to hold secrets that no one could yet fully comprehend, secrets that had been carefully recorded and preserved in that rusted metal box, waiting for someone to uncover them. Weeks passed, and the investigation into Claire Donovan's disappearance grew more urgent. The small town of Cedar Hollow, already tense with uncertainty, now became a place where suspicion and fear coiled around every corner. Detectives had analyzed the journal entries and photographs found in the rusted metal box, piecing together a portrait of someone who had been methodically observing the town for years. But nothing prepared them for what came next. A sonar scan of the riverbed, conducted by a specialized recovery team, revealed an unexpected anomaly near the bend where Claire's kayak had been found. Hidden beneath layers of sediment and river debris was the outline of a sunken rowboat, its wood waterlogged and rotting but unmistakably intact. When investigators carefully retrieved the vessel, they found inside a collection of personal belongings: Claire's waterproof bag, her notebook, and a small camera. The items had been deliberately placed, as if someone had intended for them to be hidden yet preserved. The camera contained several images that were both perplexing and chilling. Among the photographs were snapshots of the riverbank taken from strange angles, showing Claire in the distance, unaware she was being watched, as well as a blurred figure partially obscured by shadows, a presence that seemed to lurk persistently just out of reach. Detectives also noticed traces of a chemical substance on the items, a residue suggesting someone had attempted to erase fingerprints and other identifying evidence. It became clear that the person responsible for Claire's disappearance had planned meticulously, not just to observe, but to cover every possible trail. The river, previously a quiet and tranquil feature of the town, had become a stage for a sinister game, with its currents and bends used to conceal acts that were deliberate, calculated, and chillingly precise. As the investigation deepened, authorities discovered that the river had a history of unusual incidents. Years earlier, several individuals had vanished near the same stretch of water, cases that had been largely dismissed as accidents or misadventures. What had once been considered coincidence now appeared to be part of a pattern. Each disappearance shared common elements: the river, the careful staging of personal belongings, and the absence of clear signs of struggle. It was as if the river itself had been transformed into a tool, a method of concealment for someone who understood its currents, its hidden alcoves, and its shifting tides. The detectives began to map the locations, cross-referencing the journal entries with historical records and missing persons reports. The results were unsettling. The river's bends, underpasses, and hidden coves corresponded with documented disappearances, revealing a level of knowledge and planning that was both terrifying and methodical. Claire Donovan, it seemed, had unknowingly entered a network of hidden dangers, a carefully controlled environment where each move she made was likely being observed, recorded, and manipulated. The sunken rowboat became a pivotal clue not just for what it contained, but for what it represented. The presence of a person who had spent years understanding the river and the town it sustained, using that knowledge to maintain a grip of control over life and death. Cedar Hollow was no longer a peaceful riverside town. It had become a labyrinth of secrets, with currents carrying evidence of long-hidden crimes. Every ripple in the water seemed to whisper a warning, every bend a reminder that the river's surface could no longer be trusted, and that beneath its calm exterior lay a darkness that had waited decades to be revealed. The discovery of the sunken rowboat and the evidence it contained marked a turning point in the investigation. Detectives shifted their focus from simply searching for Claire Donovan to uncovering the person or people responsible for orchestrating her disappearance. Every detail from the journal entries, photographs, and maps was scrutinized for patterns, inconsistencies, or hidden clues. Slowly, a profile began to emerge. Someone with intimate knowledge of the town, a deep understanding of the river's hidden channels, and a calculated patience that spanned decades. Attention soon turned to Thomas Wainwright, a local historian whose fascination with Cedar Hollow's past was well known but had never seemed threatening. He spent long hours documenting the town's history, photographing buildings, bridges, and river landmarks, and even maintaining detailed notes about the river itself. At first glance, his work appeared harmless, a hobby shared with many townspeople who cherished the town's heritage. However, investigators discovered that Thomas's historical research often focused on unexplained disappearances and tragic accidents, and that his meticulous attention to detail extended far beyond what was typical for a hobbyist historian. Surveillance of Thomas's daily routine revealed subtle but telling behaviors. He frequently visited areas along the river where past disappearances had occurred, sometimes at odd hours, and often lingered for hours with binoculars or cameras. When detectives cross-referenced his movements with the journal entries found in the rusted metal box, a chilling correlation appeared. Every observation recorded in the journals could be linked to a location Thomas had recently visited, suggesting that he had been the watcher in the water described in Claire's notes. The investigation intensified, leading authorities to search Thomas's property. Behind his home, concealed by dense undergrowth, they discovered a shed that had been carefully hidden from view. Inside, the space was filled with surveillance equipment, more photographs, and journals spanning decades. Among the items were objects belonging to missing residents, including Claire Donovan. The evidence painted a clear and horrifying picture. Thomas had been monitoring, recording, and ultimately capturing his victims over many years, using the river as both a stage and a cover. Every discovery added to the understanding of his methods. Thomas had meticulously tracked individuals, selecting targets based on routine, vulnerability, or proximity to the river. He used knowledge of the water's currents, secluded coves, and hidden bends to control what his victims saw, where they could go, and how evidence could be concealed. The journals revealed a mind obsessed with control and documentation, detailing observations, hypotheses, and even methods for erasing traces of his presence. The river, a symbol of life and continuity for the town, had been transformed by Thomas into a mechanism of manipulation, a silent accomplice to his crimes. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they realized how narrowly Claire Donovan had escaped becoming a permanent victim of Thomas's long-hidden activities. Her discovery of the journal and her insistence on documenting her observations may have triggered a series of events that ultimately exposed him. Cedar Hollow, once a place of quiet comfort, now faced the stark reality that a person who had appeared ordinary, even respected, had used the town's landscape to commit unspeakable acts. The river, which had always flowed serenely through the heart of the town, had harbored a darkness no one had imagined. A darkness that was now finally being brought into the light. The arrest of Thomas Wainwright sent shockwaves through Cedar Hollow. For decades, he had blended seamlessly into the town's fabric, a historian admired for his dedication to preserving the past, never once drawing suspicion. Yet behind his composed exterior lay a chilling pattern of calculated violence, observation, and manipulation. When authorities led him away, the residents of Cedar Hollow were forced to confront the horrifying truth. The river that had defined their lives had been the stage for a series of carefully orchestrated crimes. During the subsequent trial, the full extent of Thomas's activities was revealed. Prosecutors detailed how he had meticulously monitored the town, tracking the routines of residents and selecting victims with precision. Claire Donovan's disappearance had been the catalyst for exposing years of hidden crimes, but evidence showed that Thomas had been involved in multiple disappearances over decades, all connected to the river and the areas surrounding it. The journals, photographs, and surveillance equipment recovered from his property painted a disturbing portrait of a man who had transformed obsession into a methodical system of control and concealment. The courtroom was filled with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow as the stories of his victims were recounted. Families who had long hoped for closure finally understood the dark reality of what had transpired, while the townspeople struggled to reconcile the image of a respected historian with the horrors he had committed. Each piece of evidence, every photograph, journal entry, and recovered belonging added to the understanding of the lengths Thomas had gone to remain undetected. He had used the river, its hidden bends, and its secluded banks as tools in a long-standing pattern of manipulation, turning the environment that had once seemed safe into an instrument of terror. Claire Donovan's role in uncovering the truth became central to the narrative. Her curiosity, attention to detail, and insistence on documenting her observations had forced cracks to appear in Thomas's carefully maintained facade. Though she had narrowly survived becoming a permanent victim, her perseverance provided the evidence that ultimately ensured justice was served. The case highlighted not only the danger of hidden obsessions, but also the power of vigilance and courage in the face of an unseen threat. As Thomas Wainwright was convicted and sentenced, the town of Cedar Hollow began the slow process of healing. The river, which had been a symbol of serenity and continuity, now carried a complex legacy. It remained a place of beauty, reflection, and life. Yet the memory of the crimes it had concealed could not be washed away. Residents who once walked its banks without thought now moved with awareness, recognizing the hidden potential for darkness beneath even the most peaceful surface. In the end, Cedar Hollow learned that evil could exist quietly, masked by familiarity and routine. The river had hidden secrets for decades, but through persistence, observation, and courage, those secrets were finally brought to light. Claire Donovan, Ed.'s experience, and Thomas Wainwright,'s exposure served as stark reminders of the fragile boundary between normalcy and danger, and of the vigilance required to confront the darkness that can lie beneath even the calmest waters. The town endured, scarred but enlightened, aware that while the river's surface may appear tranquil, its depths can conceal truths that are impossible to ignore.